All right, so I have the dates up here. Can everybody hear me okay again? Yes? Thumbs up? Okay, thanks, Carolyn. So everybody's good with this. So I thought we'd just talk a little bit first about a rewind to chapter 1. Were you able to implement any of the instructional routines into your classroom or teaching, or did you see where those would be, where you could put them in? And did you have any of those aha moments or questions if you tried to implement any of those things? So everybody just feel free whenever you'd like. If you kind of go back to those instructional strategies in chapter 1, those high leverage instructional strategies. The dialogic conversation was one of them. The repeating and expanding, and the interesting words, the vocabulary.
I don't know. I started using more of the interesting words. So after I left this, I have a speech therapist that comes into my self-contained ELA class. So I kind of sat down with her and started to go over how we could use more of the vocab, because my students, instead of like say what we're learning about with the job, instead of saying job, trying to get them to use occupation. And we've really practiced that. And then I've kind of have sent her some of what I'm doing to see if when she works with them in speech, if she can kind of connect that with some of the words. So in 3rd grade, we're using more appropriate words to have conversations about the text that we're reading, and within the classroom with the other students, just having conversations.
And that's awesome to use your speech therapist, because I feel like they are so knowledgeable. And it's nice to be able to collaborate and know that you're working for the same goals for those kids.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen a difference using those strategies?
I have. So I started to do something like this with a lot of our vocab initially, and then we're trying to do more with synonyms. My students are in 3rd grade, but their functioning level is more of like a K1. So we're still, using like mommy instead of my mother or my parent. So just trying to get them to work on that. And now that she's in my room and they see us more working together on things, and I'm sharing all of like my vocab and things with her. So they're very much more aware, and they can't say, oh, well, I haven't done that, because we're trying to hold them more accountable to just sound more like a 3rd grader and not very young.
Well, that's great. Has anyone else looked at using that vocabulary piece, those interesting words like that?
Well, it's Kelly Wagner. I was only in for a week, and then my gallbladder took me out. But in that week, it's all right. I used the dialogue, being a little more purposeful in the way I responded, and saying what the kids did, but then adding to it, or asking for that clarification, or I really like this part. Can you explain this part? I didn't really see, because it was such a narrow span of time, I did it. However, I think, just in my point of view, I felt like I was connecting more with them, and they were able, like we had mentioned last time, to have a little more of a voice in the class. And that their voices were heard. So I look forward to, when I get back in the classroom, continuing it, on the academic side of it, not just the side, but the academic side, but I think it did help with the classroom community and that.
Definitely, because I feel like it makes them feel validated, like you're hearing what they're saying, instead of, oh, that's nice, I'm glad that happened to you, or I'm glad you told me about that.
Right. And it is kind of the nature, you get mobbed when when you're in different parts. And so then you have someone responding, and then someone else immediately talks, and so then you're like, oh yes, honey, and then you turn to this one. So being a little more, pulling it down, being a little more deliberate. So
that's great. And anyone else got to use that dialogic? I'm trying to look for it here. The circle, or try any of that? Well, there was one more, but they're repeating and expanding, which I feel like kind of goes with it. So if everybody's good, we can go on to chapter 2. Sound good? All right. We'll skip over some of this. Okay, so just looking at chapter 2, the recommitting to phonemic awareness instruction. Even if you want to hold up your fingers, I mean, 1, 2, 3, or 4, before reading this chapter, I mean, how do you feel like you did even understanding what phonemic awareness was? Like, was there anybody who this was brand new to, who would have felt like they were a 1 before reading this? Phonemic awareness is, I know we've tried to talk about it in our middle school, and for high school teachers, I mean, that's something that they don't even, high school teachers really don't touch on that too much. So it can be a whole new subject to some people. All right. So we can start with Mrs. Martin and her experience. And some of us wrote about this in the notes. She is the one who they went through all the data, and she found that like what she thought was happening was not matching what some of the data said, or her kids who knew letters and sounds, and she thought that would get them very far, had very low phonemic awareness. So anybody want to jump in with that? Anybody who teaches like the K1, 2 areas have any feedback on this, or ever thought that they had that, like their assessment did not match what they thought their kids could do?
I was just going to say, Kate, that this chapter really validated to me the importance of the Haggerty program that we use, because we are doing every single part of this, from rhyming to onset to medial sounds to segmenting and blending to substitution, deletion. So it's huge, and I do find that children, it only takes 10 or 15 minutes every day, and children are really growing as readers, and they're seeing those parts and pieces and how words are interrelated. And
is anyone else familiar with the Haggerty program? Has anybody used that before?
Franklin just got this program last year, and it was phenomenal. It made a huge difference in my kindergartners. So I was very pleased with the program. I love it.
And
Walton uses it. Yeah, Walton uses it as well. And it's 5 or 10 minutes a day. The kids like it. You get your hand signals going, they're engaged, they're counting up top, they're saying the sounds and blending them. So they're really engaged. And what I found this year, which was a little surprising, is a big struggle is rhyming words. They want to always go with the vowel sound. So it's helped me identify a gap in rhyming words, and then also compound words. When they have to count the number of words in a sentence, they want to count cupcake as 2 words. So that was something that was really easy to identify, and then I could provide further instruction on.
And it reminded me so much too of like looking at, like some of us have used before Magic Penny, and that was, when I was 25 and someone said, here's this program, and I had no idea, like I had no background in it. And now I feel like, many years later, looking back, I'm like, what a great program. I wish I had understood the foundations of it and what I could have, what was in it that I could have really done. So I feel like I looked at Heggerty when I got to Unitigo, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing stuff. Like, this is so good. So I do feel like as long as districts are doing those things, they're going in the right direction for kids.
Kate, did you realize that the pre-K uses Heggerty as well?
Yes, I did. When I got there, Snyder had given me a copy of each of the books that they used. So impressed. I loved it.
Yeah.
I know. And does anybody use the assessments that go with Heggerty? Has anybody used those to guide their instruction? They do have free assessments. I've looked at them, and I don't know, because I know that the chapter 3 talks a lot about, letting assessment drive your instruction. And so I've looked at the Heggerty assessments. They're kind of lengthy, and they're free online. I mean, anybody can get them. So if anybody's looking for something like that, you can download those. All right, let's see here. So which of the misunderstandings in the shift did you find yourself thinking more deeply about? Were there different parts of those misunderstandings of how students develop phonemic awareness, or how we can teach phonemic awareness, that you felt like jumped out to you and you were like, whoa, I need to think about this a little bit?
Kate, I've always been upper elementary. Like, third grade has really been the lowest. Student teaching, you do all the different levels, but
Right.
and I think I thought I had a pretty good handle on phonemic awareness and all of the terms along with it. But as I went through the book, I realized how much I perhaps interchange the terms. I got a good understanding on it. And so I didn't really, I didn't like the misunderstandings, because I didn't have necessarily that background. They weren't ahas, but I kind of felt like in reading through it, just, the amazing how all of it works together to create that foundation. It's amazing how, like Carolyn said, 15 minutes of this particular work can have such a big yield in learning.
Oh, yeah.
For other friends who are on the feed that aren't necessarily teaching it directly, they might feel the same way. But I was, quite fascinated with how it all comes together.
And I think that's such a huge piece of it, because it mentions in the book that with phonemic awareness, it's such a low investment. You can do it anywhere, anytime, and it yields such a high return. And I loved how they said that over and over. With my daughter right now, and she's 4 in pre-K, and in the car, we'll play mystery word game, and I will tell her the phonemes, and she has to guess what the word is. Because now that I've had more experience with intervention and working with kids pre-K through 5th grade who are struggling readers, I mean, the biggest issue is they can't blend sounds together. And I know those of us who are working in the special ed and the intervention departments, people think of dyslexia as kids are reversing B's and D's, when really it comes down to it's a huge phonemic awareness piece. And that's something that, I've had to shift my mindset of even working with 4th and 5th graders playing mystery word. That it sounds silly because that's what I did as a pre-K teacher, but that's the foundation gap I have to fill for them. So what I'm doing with my 4-year-old in the car, I'm still doing with some of my big kids at school, because it's such a huge piece in their foundation. Does anybody have any experience with, with that and want to speak to that more? Just that building that foundation piece? Or what they see if kids don't have that foundation piece?
I think you're exactly right, Kate. Actually, sorry, especially I have like an upper elementary student that I work with, and you can tell, you can see those gaps in the phonological awareness, but he has compensated, you know what I mean? And he's gained like a lot of his words by sight. And so
Yes.
so it's been very interesting, like every week, just working with him and pulling apart what has been his compensation for lack of instruction or lack of, just because he moved in, but then filling in those gaps with what he needs to kind of meet him in the middle between what he has, what he's still missing. So I agree completely.
And I mean, I know Unitigo is a heavy phonics school, and I know Walton is working. I mean, they've implemented CKLA, which is heavy phonics. It's interesting to me how, the use of like an assessment with nonsense words, because I think you can really see, like you just said, Mackenzie, where the gaps are, especially with those higher kids and where they've just learned to compensate and memorize things. It's really difficult with like 2nd through 5th graders. And I'm even putting some 2nd graders in there because some of them have such great working memory that they're able to memorize all of these words. And we really don't know where their deficits are. Has anyone else experienced that?
I was just going to say at the high school level, a lot of times, and Kelly and I are different, even though we're only 3 years apart. Mm-hmm. I learned at elementary school, everything has a sound and you put the sounds together to make words, but she learned sight words.
Mine was whole language. Here's the word, and you read it.
And
you
so
read it. Yeah.
Anytime I come across a word with my students that's new to them, or maybe is a Latin form to them, I use the sounds and I put the sounds with the phonemes there, and I take the phonemes and I'm like, all right, these graphemes make this phoneme. And actually,
that just made my heart so happy to hear that.
I was going to say, they look at me, but I mean, those words, I go through and we work on sounding it out still, because that's how I learned. Mm-hmm. I learned that each one had a phoneme, and we work with what these sound like and how it relates to the graphemes in front of you. And so even when, like, she'll read one of her books that she has, and she'll say something from it, and I'm like, what word are you talking about?
And it is very different because I've learned it by reading it. And so many times in pronunciation, I struggle, even as an adult, I struggle with that and we're both graduates from Walton. And I remember 3rd grade, them starting to talk about sounds. And I remember being very confused. I'm like, no, that's the word.
But yeah.
Like, what are you talking about that there's sounds? And so, yeah.
And she'll say something. I'll look at it. I'm like, that's not the sound that makes when put together. That's not the right sound. And so, we pronounce things differently from that. And just by, like I said, 3 years difference, the reading program made a huge difference even now in what we do.
Right. And it does. I think about different things I've done with kids and I'm like, I wish I could go back and change that for them, but I didn't know, you don't know until you know. And, we're all trying to do better all the time, but I get it, because I think about that more of a whole language or this is shifting the balance. Some of us still like to think like we're doing balanced literacy, but that phonics piece is so vital, and understanding the background of it.
And it still also meshes with what we talked about last time with, the oral piece and also the listening comprehension as well, because, we talk about there's many especially words that we don't normally use in conversation that you pick up by reading. And the more you read, the more words you learn. But it's important that we're also bringing that into conversation so that they
can connect the correct phoneme with the correct grapheme.
Right.
That's one of the huge frustrations, I think, in general, of the English language, is because we're such a blend of Germanic and Romantic languages. Sometimes the same graphemes can have completely different phonemes. And so, you know, they need to hear it in the conversation to help match it to what they're seeing.
Right. And that's that whole, this is why, you know, all these chapters kind of build on each other. So that vocabulary piece is so huge. I'm noticing my second grader learning how to read. She does have a pretty, you know, large vocabulary, and we've tried to expose her, and you know, she's traveled and she does different outside activities. So she has a little more exposure than maybe a child who doesn't, but I watch her read and she can guess at the word because she understands what's going on in the story. Now, whether or not she can truly segment those sounds and actually sound out the word, that I still don't know. I have my doubts. But her background is what's gotten her through to where she is right now. So that next piece is really honing in on the phonics. She does not like them. I make her do that. So that's a real fun time. But anyone else have anything to add to that? Building vocab and the phonics at the same time?
I do think that you see the gaps in high school students for sure, because as I'm reading this and learning more about it, which is brand new to me, I'm thinking about all of these years where I have kids who are reading something and then they just skip over a word if they don't know it. So they don't have any tools to be able to figure out what that word is.
Right.
And I didn't learn that the way that Ken learned in school either. So I didn't have, as a high school teacher, I didn't really have those skills to be able to approach that. But, you know, I kind of wish I had this now, because I do see where it would help them.
Well, and even as elementary teachers, I get it. And has anybody used Faunus and Pinnell and like the 3 cueing systems? And we see now, like, having them, like, one of the strategies is to skip the word and just come back to it and try to rely on context to figure it out. Where, I mean, as adults, we can do that to a point, but being more intentional about teaching our kids those phonics, the structures and the strategies, and stretching out the word the first, you know, prompt or cue that we give them is really what we need to be doing. And that's in another chapter in this book too, so it's all there. How about the Alconin boxes? Is everyone familiar with those, and what did they think? I did write down the right notes. Alconin box, yeah, I'm like, I feel like that was in the next chapter. Nope, they're there. Does everybody use these? Is this a typical strategy or tool you use with your kids?
I used them, Kate, but I never knew what they were called, or if I did, it went one ear and out the other. So when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's what they're called. And we'll use them in like the Tap It, Map It, Graph It centers for kids who are needing maybe like CVCC and CVC words. So I've used them. I was happy to learn what they were called or remember what they were called.
Yeah, and I feel like it's probably more of a K1 thing. But second grade would definitely, like you said, if kids need more of those gap fillers, that would be where that would come in.
I call them sound spaces in my room. But we you know, count the sounds in the word, and then we put a space for each one, so it's not a box, but it's a space, and then put the letters back in for each space to match the sound.
Right, and I think that's what CKLA does a nice job of ensuring that those phonemic awareness pieces are in the instruction. I really like how they do that. And I think too, if we're like using Alconin boxes, even on top of that, it's more of that manipulative piece. So they can, Road to Reading or Road to the Code calls it, say it, move it, say it, maybe it's just say it, move it. I don't know. So it sounds, all these things are so similar, but it gives them just that tactile piece to it. So they really, their brain can associate it with how many sounds. And even reading this, like, I feel like I do a lot of the orthographic mapping with my kids, even my big kids. But I really could be giving them, like, I'm looking at the bingo chips. I mean, even the big kids could do this, and that would help that for that tactile and that sensory piece. Has anyone done this with older kids, like 3 through 5?
I have. I wish I had brought one to show you guys because I really love it. But when we did the letters 1 training, our presenter brought in like a whole bunch of different manipulatives to use for like different ways to work on the phonemic awareness. And one of them was taking like a paint stirrer stick and then Velcroing different colored like poker chips to it. And you can just use it simply just to practice like the blending and segmenting, but then you can also use it for like those more advanced, like the phoneme manipulation. So like isolating a sound. And so with some of my older kids who struggle with those more advanced phonemic awareness pieces, like, you know, if you said, say Brad, now change the B to G to make grad. So they have to physically then put a new different color chip. And it's really fascinating how that visual piece helps them. Like where if I just do that verbally with them, they can't get it, but then I put that in front of them and they get to actually just move. There's no letters. It's just the chips
I was just going to
representing
say,
the
does
sound.
it show them the letter?
Nope. It's because it's specific. It's just the phonemic awareness. It's not adding in that connection to the letters and the phonics. It's like those are all based on those I think they mentioned in here David Kilpatrick, his like 1 minute drills with the different levels of those phonemic isolation, deletion. So those are I really find those to be very helpful in the
Could
kids.
you
Like you
take
said.
pictures of those and maybe put them in the drive?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
And if anyone else has different tools that they use like that, we could just start throwing those in the drive so everybody can have access to those and check them out. Because I mean, now I'm sitting here thinking I should be doing more of that with my big kids.
I've done that. I do that a lot in my resource room. But then my kids are in 3rd grade, and so we've been trying to expand it and then getting them to add the phonics piece. So like recently we just did stuff with digraphs with the boxes, and the visual has definitely helped my kids try to go from saying the sounds and then going and then now writing it. If I feel like when I have the boxes, my kids are able to write the words correctly. But then when I'm asking them to write it without a box, they're struggling. So we're trying to make that connection because my kids, like for the digraph, the box is bigger than just a single letter. So they're recognizing that, but now we're just trying to get them to think about it and still utilize it, but not always necessarily having a box around it and apply it when they're writing.
And that's interesting because I do the same thing. We go from one kind of scaffold from one to the other and they write sentences. But Carolyn had mentioned like she has them write the sound spaces, like count out the sounds and then write the spaces. So that could be a good transition if that, you know, might help them a little bit. So they don't have the boxes, but they have to figure out how many sounds themselves and then write their own spaces.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Anything else for chapter 2? I know we talked even about speech therapists, the assessment piece. Does anybody have any good assessments they like for the phonemic awareness that they'd want to share out? Do districts make their own? Do they use CKLA? Like, what is your district doing for a phonemic awareness assessment?
If we think there's like a, I guess, significant phonemic awareness deficit, we'll use the past for some of our students.
And that's Kilpatrick, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
To just kind of get
his book
more in depth on like what level they're at. Is it the syllable level? You know, is it onset rhyme? Is it some of those more advanced? So we will use it. We don't do it with everyone. It's kind of, you know, when we're kind of trying to figure out what's the missing piece, what's at the root of their struggle. So we have used that one.
Okay. Franklin, do you guys have a set phonemic awareness assessment that you give?
Not really. I mean, so when we did when we first started Haggerty last year, some of us used that assessment, but this year with just adopting the new Wonders 2023, the assessment that they have you do is like 23 pages long for everything. So it was like very overwhelming. So they do, I mean, they have a lot of that within, but we're just kind of trying to find a balance. I know for special ed students or some of the AIS, we have done the past, and some of us do have the Kilpatrick book, so we can do interventions from it. But I feel like what I've noticed with some of my students is they do great with Haggerty, but then when I gave them the past, because I wasn't using hand motions, you know, they're becoming so reliant on that, and just my kids need so much repetition and just slowly trying to wean them off. Like when I do Haggerty right now in the room, I don't always do the choppers, or I don't always do a roller coaster and things like that, because I say to them, if you need to use this to help you, then please do. If you don't need to use it, don't, because I'm seeing like such a difference in scores when I do a Haggerty assessment compared to the past, because
so that transfer of skill isn't really there.
Yeah, that's still very, very difficult for a lot of the students that I work with.
Right. No, that I get it. It is difficult. I'm using Magic Penny tools, and we use the Magic Penny assessment, and just taking the visual cues away, or like me holding the book, the flip book, my kindergartners, some of their test scores, I'm like, wait a minute, you know how to do this. Why are you not doing it? I have plenty of data that says you can, but it was
that was the hard part. We had a staff developer from BOCES come in, and she's like, oh, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, no, they know this. I know they do. Like, I've seen it, I've done it, but it's just that transfer of the skill that we struggle with. And a lot of my, you know, special education students, their biggest thing that they need is visuals. So when you take that away from them, they have a hard time.
That does make it difficult. Corey, I don't know if you want to speak. I know you're special ed too, so I don't know if you want to speak to BOCES, or if you just want, you let me know how much you want to share. Or...
Yeah, so unfortunately, my role is more of a social emotional learning classroom. So we basically just have 5 hours in a day of, you know, at this point it's picking and choosing what we can do and what we can't do. But also the other piece is, so I currently have 7 students. They all come from 6 different districts. So I can't really like say what they have their background in. But I mean, if I had a student that I felt needed some form of assessment, at this point, it's more reaching out to districts to see what they have, or what they would be willing to work with us on.
Right. I know. And that's a really difficult thing to do, is juggle all of those pieces.
Yeah.
Because I mean, just 3 here are all doing different things.
Yeah. And I mean, that is the challenge. And I think something that I did take away from like this chapter, and I think even in the notes, Kelly had wrote something about like, just, you know, like, so my kids are, you know, supposed to be a 3rd grade or 4th grade, but they don't have these like foundational skills. And it's just like taking my busy schedule and trying to figure out what is the most important thing that I can do with them, or I can give them to make them somewhat successful, you know, or trying to somewhat close that gap that's just really big.
Right. I know that's a huge challenge, and doing any of that is great work. So if any of us can help you, I mean, reach out, because I'm sure we all have plenty of resources. We can put them in the drive. All right, so if we look at chapter 3, sorry. Well, they did have some good quotes on here. I feel like, we've gone over most of these. We've talked about the intentional phonemic awareness instruction to help those reading difficulties in later grades. I put this in here because I feel like it's really difficult sometimes to really differentiate what you're trying to say when it comes to these 3 terms. So I just thought that was a good visual in there. All right, let's go to chapter 3. All right, Miss Lynn's experience. Anybody want to throw out there how they felt about this with her teaching phonics and then it not coming up in their readers? I feel like anybody who's taught with Phonics and Pinnell has this struggle.
I know for me, I've tried to change a lot of what I'm doing to make it more intentional, because a lot of my students are low. Last year, for the younger grades, we had Ready Classroom, or iReady, and it didn't have any phonics. All the phonics were online, so there was nothing within the classroom really. So that was a real struggle, and that from there, and we realized that there was an issue. We found a program off of Teachers Pay Teachers with some phonics, and it was Allison Ryan from the Primary Pond. I don't know if anybody's familiar with her, but she does a ton of trainings just off of Facebook, and they're like 1-hour sessions, and I really enjoyed them. It's been really helpful to kind of go through, but with a phonics program, we didn't have one. So we purchased it and then put together binders in all the lower grade levels to use. And then I've continued to use some of that and her intervention program. And I really like it because it does do a lot with your real words versus nonsense words, and picking them and putting them in a sentence, and mapping words and writing words. And then there's always a story, and it's based on that certain skill. So like if I've done digraphs, there was a story, and it was just all with like a CH digraph. And then there's like each section, then there's a whole section on SH, and just everything was aligned to it. And it gave my students such more of that repetition in which they need. I'm finding right now because we just adopted a Wenders, that my kids are so low, and it's like they have one like little thing for them to do. And I'm like, I need weeks of practice to do, work with digraphs, not, hey, here's digraphs for the week on your spelling or something, and then we're moving on to something else. Like my kids need so much more. So it's been me trying to pull from other resources to make sure I'm giving them all of that repetition and experience and exposure to that in order for them to, to read it, to write it, and bring that all back together.
So it's interesting because cumulative instruction, or like I put down in my notes, like spiral review, they talk about it on page 72, and it lists Wiley Blevins, and it's he's quoted saying about mastery focus.
Yep.
Does anyone else feel like CKLA gives plenty of spiral review, correct? Am I right? And because it builds on the skills that they use. So, with that being said, what I thought was interesting from this is, like Nicole just said, she was finding difficulty for them to practice what they had worked on. I feel like I've had to shift my mindset from, like, when I used Phonics and Pinnell, it was always you take an F&P book and you find the difficult phonics patterns within that book, and you kind of build your own lesson by introducing those phonics patterns. And I feel like we're shifting this year into really looking at assessment, looking where the gaps are, and then honing in on those. We still use Phonics and Pinnell books to give kids practice with authentic texts, because they're not always just going to read a book with digraphs and you know, the EE vowel team. Like, if they pick up a book at home, they're going to be expected to do a little bit more work in that. So I feel like I still rely on my F&P books. It's very difficult for me to give those up, but I know has really good authentic texts that do go with a great scope and sequence. I know there's like High Noon books, I think they're called. Does anyone else have any suggestions or anything that they use that follows a very intentional scope and sequence with phonics, or that the district has purchased? Because I know that's a big issue too. Does Walton have like different authentic texts besides the CKLA readers that they're using?
I mean, I really do like, we've been able to use to do the skills with the readers with some of our intervention groups. And I do like how they build, they have the past phonics patterns that they've worked on, and they build on that in the readers. So those are nice, but decodable texts are hard. You mentioned Wiley Blevins. I know he, like, so many of them just aren't authentic. That's the hard,
No, they're kind of terrible to read, honestly. Some of the early ones, you're like, oh,
I know they've definitely gotten better. We've Hegarty actually came out with 2 sets, actually, that Emily Gibbons, she's big dyslexia trainer.
I've looked at those sets, but again, it's the money piece. How much can we ask for anybody to buy us?
Yeah, those, I think I actually bought a set myself because I was just curious. They're so authentic, and they're not perfectly lined up. You know what I mean? Obviously, the scope and sequence is different. But for some of my kids who struggle, but it's a chapter book, that's just a great feeling for them. Like, because, it looks like a chapter book, but it's still working on like CVCE and single syllable words. So I do like, I kind of just embed them though. It's not perfect, but I do like those. I've even tried a little bit with the Frog. I think it's the Frog series that she put out, which is more focused on digraphs, but again, not super decodable, but I like how authentic they are, because that is nice. That's
right.
hard.
Well, and that's the thing with the big kids too, is I think those, I think it's High Noon it's called. I'll have to look it up and see if I can send it. There's some that are like Info Mag, I think was one of them. They're like chapter books or magazines that are all decodable for the older kids, and they're pretty cool. So those were some notes I had about like that cumulative instruction and spiral review piece, because that can be really hard to bridge that together if you're trying to work strictly on phonics, and how do you put that together. But if you're working with CKLA, they do a great job with that. So the other thing that was on here, it says during the reading, think about, let assessment guide you. I loved the quote on page 74. It says, assessment serves as a path to differentiation, and our phonics program becomes responsive. So it's like, I've thought about this a lot lately in terms of like how we're meeting all the kids' needs with this. And I feel like it's such a big piece to think about. But when you really think of phonics, you have kids coming in who are far leaps and bounds ahead of their peers, and then you have some with huge gaps. And if your assessment is serving as your guide, I mean, how do we even go about using all these resources to tackle all those needs? I didn't know if anybody, that's kind of a loaded question. That's a heavy question, but I mean, that's how I took it. Like, let assessment serve as a path to differentiation, let it guide you. I mean, that's a heavy requirement of a teacher. So I just didn't know how anybody felt about that.
Kate,
Well, I
just
always
to
like,
speak-
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I can't see who's talking right now. So
It's Tina.
Hey.
I know I'm in second grade, and we're really fortunate for the past 2 years. We take a beginning of the year assessment provided in CKLA, and then we really dive into that data. And then we have a common hour for our CKLA, and we're able to use the program like it's supposed to. So we can make 2 small groups, and we have a group that will, the assessment has identified the gaps, and we're taking them back to kindergarten. There's another group that's like end of kindergarten, and then there's 2 of us working at the second grade level. Usually one of the groups has to take like 2 days to do a lesson, and then another teacher can move a little bit faster. So every day those students are getting an hour of instruction at their level where those gaps are. So we're just not pushing them through. And then we continue to look at the data and assess, and sometimes we will be able to shift kids up into a different group. So I just think it's a really, we're really fortunate to be able to follow the program in second grade like it's supposed to.
So is that considered your tier 1 time, or how does that work? Is that your win time that you do that?
Nope, this would be our tier 1. So students, like right now we have, because it's almost the end of the year, we have a group that's the beginning. They started in the middle to beginning of kindergarten, but they've filled those gaps. So now they're like middle to beginning of first grade. The other group is approaching second grade. And then there are 2 classes this year because we're seeing growths more than we ever have. Like doing our report cards, we were all talking, was so great because we've never given so many like on grade level. So there's 2 classes with 18 in each of them. And we are just going at the second grade pace for that instruction.
And that's just for the skill strand?
Yes, that's the skills strand. Then we teach the knowledge. Everyone's exposed to the knowledge piece in the classroom. And then we have our win time where we'll hit those other areas that are identified for our tier 3 students.
So does 3 through 5 have a skill strand? Anybody?
This year they do not, but this year is the first year because this is second grade, second or third year of doing this. We've now brought third grade in. So we're identifying students at the end of second grade that we feel they need to, maybe they made it to the middle of first grade, maybe they made it to the beginning of second grade. So the third grade team is now building in a small area where they can continue where we left off, to not just forget about them and push them through. So they're slowly starting to do it in third grade. Otherwise, like they said earlier, they have 5th and 6th graders who can't read, but if the code is not taught and continued, it's not going to change.
Right. No, that makes total sense. It's a really great thing to think about. That's a ton of work. Bless you all. That is a lot. That's great.
But it's working. I really truly feel we're seeing the rewards.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great to hear. Carolyn, I know you wanted to speak too about that. Did you want to add to Tina's?
Well, I was just thinking about assessments in general. There's just such a small window of where the child is working. And, I think about even the reading level assessments that you do with MTSS. Is it, how accurate is it? Is it what if you chose a nonfiction text and the child had no background knowledge, or the child was tired that day, or the child, it's just a small picture. And So I just think we need to put all those pieces together. How are they doing in the classroom? How are skill strand wise versus small group instruction versus the assessment. And I do think the assessment is a strong piece, but it's only one of the pieces of that puzzle.
And I completely agree. And I'm gonna did I show this last time? This knowledge gap book that I'm reading. It talks a lot about like state assessments and exactly that. Actually, I think for those of us who had our faculty meeting this year, and he showed us a clip of like something about cricket or some like an English sport. Does anybody remember that? And we had to decipher what it was with no background knowledge. This really talks about like these kids were teaching them skills, but without the background knowledge, they can't even apply the skills because, the assessment piece is, we could be giving them passages to read where they have no background in understanding. I did a prep today with my 5th graders on the history of the White House, and some of the people, the names in it, I'm thinking they don't know who this is. Like, this is so much for them to take in. They have 5 different, names from the George Washington's time period. And I'm like, I'm having a hard time figuring this out. Like, I can't imagine what's going on in their little brains. But that background knowledge would have been huge in helping them understand what they were reading. Without it, let alone even just being able to decode it, I was like, this is a lot. This is a lot, friends. We're going to take it a little at a time. Sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
I don't know. I just had like multiple thoughts on multiple things you said.
There's a lot there.
Now it's all like mixed up. But one of the things I was like, to go along with that, on one of the state assessments when I was in 6th grade, they gave a passage about football, but it was spelled F-U-T-B-O-L. It was talking about soccer. And not a single kid, as I was walking around the room, had any clue what the passage. Every single kid wrote about American football. So like that just kind of made me think of that, and how that background knowledge piece was so important because they had no clue. And even though there were clues in there, it never explicitly said it is soccer. So they were all talking about American football, which was very fascinating to me. Even though there were clues in there, it talked about goals, it talked about the kicking and the net, and they still didn't pick up on that because they didn't have background knowledge. And the other piece I was thinking of is like, so we have the assessments, and I was thinking about the FastBridge assessment that we use. And like we get like a score at the end, or like a grade level equivalent, or like a, you know what I'm talking about, like a score thing. But like, I don't know if there's a way to like see specific skills in there that like it's broken down more of where to target to use those assessments. So I guess that's where I see like a break in the assessment for me, at least, because I don't know if I don't know how to use the program correctly or what, but it's like very broad.
So that's a great question though. And I'd love to get other like different districts' takes on this. So when I think of that, I think of FastBridge as our universal screener. It just flags kids for this child is at risk. This child may be, could potentially be at risk. So like the red, yellow, green, or this child is in the green, they're pretty much performing on grade level. And that's where then those diagnostic tests come in that can tell us more of their phonics skills, their decoding, their fluency, and their comp. And that's where we get that breakdown. But it'd be interesting, like, what do other districts, like, what are you guys doing? Or I know, and Ashley's worked in different districts, like, is there other assessments that would guide you to then inform your instruction?
I mean, I also wonder too, like how much doing these on the computer.
I know
that's
that
like
is
a separate discussion, but like, I mean, a state test too, like, because it's a whole nother skill to add in.
Oh,
and
listen,
so then it's like
copying and pasting today. That was a mind blown.
Yeah.
Like,
so I just
a lot for 5th graders.
There's just so many pieces to it, but that's just my thought.
No, I agree. There's so many things, but I agree. Mackenzie, what were you going to add to that?
I had two things. One, do you guys do the early reading part of FastBridge for like your kindergartners as part of your screener for K and 1, or is it just the A reading piece on the computer?
We do early reading, right, Carolyn? I've never administered it. I think, I mean, I can check that tomorrow because that will break down, right? Because that's one-on-one with a human.
That's what I was gonna say is like when you mentioned that, Ashley, definitely like the A reading, you can't really dive into like, are they just happy clicking or is there an actual
That's the other
gap?
piece of it.
But the early reading is nice because it's those one-on-one assessments, and then we do the fluency, the CBM actually, so we read with every student in the school too, so that gives us a little insight, not specifics, but like you said, Kate, it's definitely our universal screener. One phonics like diagnostic tool that we use that might be useful for some, it's just called the Quick Phonics screener, Quick Phonics Survey, QPS. There is, I believe, a free version online. I think we might have come across it through Letters first, but like we've wanted to get an updated version, but it costs money, so we haven't. But it breaks it down. So if you wanted to kind of see where the phonics gap is with your student, like it starts with CVC words in isolation, then within sentences, then CVCE words, then like vowel team words, and then it even goes into 2-syllable words with prefixes and suffixes, and then 3, 4, and 5-syllable words. So we use that quite a bit, like especially when we were doing some of the new stuff with WIN this year to see, okay, these students have a solid, base with single syllable code, but then it breaks down when they get into that multisyllabic work. So, and it's quick. That is the nice thing about it. Like you could do it knowing where your student might need to start at most 10 minutes. Most of it's usually 5 minutes based on what you need for your student.
And so we administered the core this year. Have you heard of that?
No.
That you can find it free online, but there is a book that goes with it, and it's very much the same. And then we charted out like all their scores for who needs, CVC, who needs digraphs, like,
Gotcha.
And we asked our teachers. I don't know if I can pull it up to share without seeing names, but we took it and I don't know. Me like we chunked it up, and that's what we're using to inform our instructions in our MTSS groups. We were able to, let me see if I can do this without showing kids names. Maybe if this will come up. So, and then we asked our teachers, like, what have you covered in second grade so far? So, and then we took the first and the second, and let me see if I can just hide these columns real quick. There we go. All right, so if I show this,
You're muted, Kate.
now, no?
Can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Is it working? Okay. So you can see, like, we sorted it out in a spreadsheet and then could go through and look at what they were missing. And so it had all these different topics within the core. Like, so I feel like, we're all kind of doing the same thing with probably different tools.
I really wish there was something this cut and dry for comprehension. It's so hard.
I know. Am I still sharing, or can you see me?
I can see you.
Okay. I have asked this of everyone in BOCES, the BT BOCES, the DCMO, but I just need someone to help me because comprehension is so difficult. 3rd through 5th that is just that's a very different beast. Shifting the Balance is supposed to come out with a 3 through 5 version. and I'm hoping it's soon, and it talks about comprehension because I need help with that. That is a very hard thing. If anybody knows anything, feel free to share that out. Any other thoughts on chapter 3? Any high leverage instructional routines you thought about? I mean, we talked about whole group and small group phonics instruction and what different districts are doing for that and what that looks like. Just looking at some of these. I just feel like it was a good reminder to me of things I need to do, even especially with my own children at home. And it gave me some validation on word chaining that we're doing as a big part of our intervention right now. So I'm like, okay, we're doing the right things. We're going in the right direction.
I don't know. It's an older game, but it's Teacher Monster to Read. When it first came out, it was free, and I remember some people remember her. She's retired now, but Marcy Anderson found it for the iPads that she had written a grant for, and she told me about it, and I downloaded it on my phone, and yeah, it's still there. The girls still enjoy doing it, but once they get by, there's a lot of learning the phonics. It's pretty much all phonics, but the word chains, and they get more complex and they bring more sounds in. The only downfall to it is a British based. So there's a few letters that they say that the kids will be like, what is that? Like, what is that? Right. They got a little frustrated with that. And again, I don't know, it was, Marcy had told me about it, I think back when Belle was like in kindergarten. And it was
kids
free.
have used it this whole time. They play on it still, and it's all focused on matching the phonemes and the graphemes together.
Well, I might need to download this for my own children at home.
Yeah.
It also has the phonemes on their own, not the phonics, but the phonetics part. So they actually have, where's the ch sound, and listening for ch and things like that.
And they heard different things, and then they catch little, what are they called? Those little trickies, little trickies. And the trickies are sight words. And then they build the thing of trickies. But again, it gets a little weird with some of the sounds because it is British.
They might think that's fun, though. They might think it's fun.
No, they found it fun. But again, I'm not sure what that is, the price wise that, but for iPads, if they had a free weekend, that might be something for a center. But they do get a little territorial because you can go pretty far in it and it progresses.
Right.
And, and Belle would get very upset if Evie tried to get onto her game because that was her.
Right. Well, I'm going to write that down for my own children. All right. Well, that was a lot to do in an hour, but thank you everyone for all your participation and thoughts. And next week we'll look at chapter 4 and 5. I think it's actually talking about sight words. It is the sight word chapter. And I really loved that because I really do love orthographic mapping. And then 5 gets into the 3 cueing system and how you can shift the balance for that, which that's a big one for, even to use in the 3rd through 5th grade reading groups. Any questions, or is everybody good to go? Good to go? All right. Well, we'll see you all. I don't even know when our next meeting is, but sometime in April. I'll send out an email. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.